Hello, everybody. Well, we have over 300 people here today, which is really great. I will say it's also frigid here in New York City. I do have a heated blanket on, which is why I think Zoom is so great because you can't see that I have something on my lap. So we're excited to have you here. I'm Amanda. I'm the CEO and co-founder of AI for Education. If it's your first webinar or you've been to a lot of them, we're happy to have you here. I'm incredibly fortunate and excited to be able to have Eric Hudson, who's been really on the forefront of thinking about how we can have AI adoption really be human-focused and human-centered. Mandy from our team is here as well. And if we want to go to the next slide, you're already doing it, so thank everyone for saying hello in the chat. We want you to get involved. Here's the way to do it. Since there's so many of us today, the chat is really for you all to communicate, to share best practices and resources. We'll also be dropping in resources all along the way. So please use the chat for that. But if you have a specific question for Eric, myself, or Mandy, please put that in the Q&A because that's where we're going to be really looking for those kind of major questions. As always, I'll pepper in those questions as we go, and then also at the end with a little bit of time. If we're not going to be prompting today, but if you do want to try out some stuff where you really like something, please click on it and try it out. And then also share those resources that you really enjoy. We love our community of practice that we've built. You all are amazing. You're worldwide. You're thoughtful, and you have lots of great ideas and resources. So this is an opportunity to work together. So we appreciate you having us here. And I'm gonna call Eric on the stage now. So Eric, I feel very lucky to have been doing this work for the last year and a half. And Mandy and our team was like, we have to do a webinar with Eric. And it was really interesting because I kind of didn't place a name, but Eric and I had already just spent a day together with the Middle States Association, who have a responsible AI accreditation that they're working towards. And so Eric and I and a group of people are able to come together and think about essentially what learning looks like in with AI adoption. And I was so impressed by just how thoughtful and also just how our philosophies align. So Eric, we're really excited to have you here today. We're gonna hand it over to Eric just so you know what's gonna go. He's gonna do about a 10-minute talk, and then we're gonna pull Mandy on stage and have a bit of a conversation. But I love, Eric, for you to start with just saying hello and introducing yourself, and then we'll start your presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Amanda. So happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Really glad to be part of a truly kind of worldwide conversation about AI in education. Everyone, my name is Eric Hudson. I'm an independent consultant. I work with schools and nonprofits on kind of learner-centered pedagogy, leadership, and strategic program design. And like Amanda and AI for Education for the last couple of years, a lot of that work has been around artificial intelligence in education. And so what I'm going to work through today are just a framework that I've developed over the course of working with many, many schools on this topic. And I hope that it offers you some insight kind of in ways to think about how to approach generative AI in kind of a long-term, sustainable, human-centered way. And so we'll go to the next slide, Mandy. Thank you. So this all came from the idea that schools are human-centered organizations. They're made for and by people. And I don't believe that generative AI should change that. I think schools should remain very human-centered organizations. And so when I work with schools, I try to get them to take that long view about how do we need to approach generative AI in a way that keeps the humanity of our teachers and our students and our communities at the center. And so I articulated these 4 priorities to help schools kind of think about different pathways towards doing that. The 4 priorities are augmentation over automation, literacy over policy, design over technology, and vision over decisions. And I articulated these 4 priorities in this way because in my experience, and I'd be super curious if the AI for Education team feels the same way, in my experience, schools tend to be very, very focused on the bottom words. They talk a lot about what AI is going to automate. They're really worried about policy. They're super focused on AI as something that's a technological issue. And they feel kind of overwhelmed by the number of decisions that they feel they need to make. But I think there's a lot of research and a lot of sort of useful ideas in the sense of a human-centered approach actually prioritizes those top words. Of course, the bottom words matter, but when it comes to big decisions about generative AI in our schools, we want to really focus on those top words. And so I'll walk you through kind of what I mean by each priority really quickly, and then we'll have a conversation about them. So we can go to the next slide. So augmentation over automation comes from an essay from Eric Brynjolfsson at Stanford University. It's called The Turing Trap. It actually came out before ChatGPT, so it's about 3 years old. And Brynjolfsson makes this argument that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we tend to be very focused on automation. That's that dark green circle on the left side of your screen. There's a set of tasks that humans can do, and there's a subset of tasks that AI is and will be able to fully automate. We can just delegate that stuff to AI. But Brynjolfsson says if we're really interested in a human-centered future with AI, we have to focus on augmentation. That's a much broader, wider, more interesting realm where human beings use AI to do things that human beings weren't capable of before, that we exert our agency over AI, use our creativity, our empathy, our sense of what's right, and leverage AI as a tool to kind of extend or create new capabilities that weren't possible before. And I think we can talk about this afterwards, but there's kind of lots of ways to think about this in a school context. But the main way I think about it in a school context is, what do our colleagues and our students need to know and be able to do in order to take an augmentation forward approach to generative AI rather than an automation forward approach? So that's priority one. And that kind of leads us into priority two on the next slide, which is AI literacy over AI policy. I know that AI for Education has their own framework. There's lots of really good ones out there. I like Digital Promises framework. But basically, the idea here is that generative AI is such a powerful and rapidly evolving technology that to try to articulate policy, which is really designed to like control or constrain behavior, is probably not the right approach when you're thinking long term. Instead, a much more durable, transferable skill that we can give our colleagues and our students is literacy. And Digital Promise defines AI literacy in 3 ways. We have to understand generative AI, meaning understand both how it works, the ethical considerations when using it, as well as what its flaws are. We have to be able to evaluate AI output. We have to be able to evaluate AI tools for their efficacy and their usefulness. And we have to use generative AI tools. One of the best ways to build literacy is to use them, to build our skills in working with these tools. And by combining these 3 elements, understand, use, evaluate, we're building sort of a long-term durable approach to being able to kind of adjust as this technology evolves. You know, AI is going to look really different a year from now, 5 years from now. What do we need? We need to be literate so that we can onboard those developments in a kind of thoughtful and ethical way. And I think sort of schools, you know, articulating a policy is important, but how can we use our policy as a launching pad for really investing in the literacy of both adults and students in our community? All right, let's do the next one. So the next one is design over technology. And this is the idea that even though generative AI is obviously a technology, our response to generative AI is not a technology response, or it shouldn't be a technology response. It's a design response. And I really like the work of Mahabali. I know that Amanda and team really like her as well. She's at the American University in Cairo. And she says that, you know, educators have 4 options in an AI age. You can make AI use impossible, and the only way to do that is to make your assessments kind of fully supervised. You can discourage AI use by redesigning assessments to forms that AI would not perform well on. You can allow AI use within boundaries, or you can allow indiscriminate use, but you have to choose. Generative AI is a disruptive technology, and we do need to make a choice about how we want to approach it. And I hope you'll notice that 1 and 2 are not about AI at all. It's about kind of shifting maybe the environment or the mode or the pedagogy behind our assessments. And when I do trainings with teachers and we do sort of design exercises around assessment, I tell them that the real work ahead of them are 2 and 3. Either you're going to need to redesign your assessments so that they appeal to students or work with students in a way that discourages AI use, or you're going to have to learn how to integrate AI in a thoughtful, responsible way into assessments so that students learn how to use the technology productively and effectively. And it's this idea that 2 and 3 are really about design and not necessarily about AI that makes this priority really important to me. Okay. Okay, great. Let's do the last one. So the last priority is vision over decisions. When I work with school leaders, a lot of them feel very overwhelmed by decisions they need to make. Which tool should we buy? What should I do about the student who cheated? Should we allow faculty or teachers to write college recommendations using generative AI? And it just feels like this kind of overflowing tidal wave of decisions. But if you make decisions without a vision, all a decision does is move you to the next decision. And so I really encourage school leaders, especially, to get clear about their vision. And I really like this kind of articulation of the difference between vision and mission. A vision is a future objective. So, what are we working towards? What do we want our schools or our organizations? What kind of impact do we want them to have on the world 5, 10, 50 years from now? What do we hope to accomplish someday? And then how might generative AI support us in working towards that vision? What role can it play in supporting our vision so that we're not making decisions about generative AI, we're making decisions about how generative AI affects our vision. And our mission as schools and organizations is to try to live out and work towards that vision every day. And so when we make those day-to-day decisions about generative AI that feel relentless and overwhelming, how are we making sure that those decisions are really aligned to both our mission and our vision, and that we're working towards those things all the time? And so that's kind of a really quick overview of all the different priorities, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it. Amanda, Mandy, others, if you kind of want me to go deep and give specifics, I'm happy to, but I'm looking forward to talking more.
Yeah, no, this is great. Maybe let's go back to the slide, the very first slide, Mandy. Let's go back there and use that as a kind of foundational kind of place for us to go. And Mandy, come on screen too. And so first of all, everyone in the chat, we love it. Please continue to have the conversation. But one more, Mandy, let's go to the 4. And so I think that some things that really like kind of you know, were interesting in the chat, but also for us is that we kind of actually see augmentation not even as potential goal, but like empowerment is even a step
Mm,
further. Like what has just never been possible before, and what that could really mean. And so I think that there's even a bigger goal potentially as the technology develops. I think
mhm,
also, I mean, Manny can talk about this, but like we don't do policy writing. We do guidance writing, and we
mhm.
do guidance writing, and in every set of guidance we write, AI literacy is a core component. So Mandy, you want to talk a little bit why we kind of avoid that idea of policy?
Yeah, we just kind of think that policy is a much more prescriptive and formal regulation around what is a really fluid and developing technology. And so it can be difficult to go back and revise formal policy that's gone through like board approval and things like that in response to advances in the field. And so we generally try to steer people towards the language of like guidance or guidelines because that can be more like agile and responsive to developments as they come along.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then go
I
ahead, sorry.
totally agree. I mean, I think the challenge with policy is that, like you said, it's kind of very bureaucratic, but also it's about control, and I don't think that that's kind of the right approach when we're talking about kind of working with people and using this technology.
I mean, oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, and someone actually asked in the chat around like student use, and I know that like at this stage, that's a big question, but the idea of like banning or controlling these tools or like creating like this kind of very punitive system is going to be very difficult because I think that what we don't recognize is just how ubiquitous these tools are going to be. Like generative AI, we talk a lot about is more like the internet or electricity than it is like an app or a
Right,
device. It's
right.
going to be the underlying power behind things you don't even realize are generative AI. And so the idea that you would would have a set of policies that was really about a locus of control, it's going to be very difficult for that to be actionable, but also like shelf stable. It's just, and I think that that's where the literacy component comes in, because if you focus on literacy, those are mindsets. Those are foundational skills. Those are trying things out and seeing what works or doesn't work, and actually having meaningful conversations with teachers and students about appropriate use. And I think that goes to the design with Maha. There was a kind of a conversation about the difference between AI resistant assessments and then AI enabled assessments. But I
Mhm.
think realistically, like we have to redesign like school. I mean, I think that this is a big part, and the human-centered approach. I think we've always wanted school to be more human-centered. And it's
Yeah,
really hard to do. I don't know, Mandy, I feel like Mandy and Eric probably agree with me. Like, we would have loved if school could have been more human-centered and more student-centered and the relationships, but all the systems in place have been pretty difficult to do that. And I think that this is both a forcing mechanism and an opportunity to have that like actually redesign the way we assess students.
Well, humans are scary and unreliable, right? So if we center them and we allow them kind of to operate free form in this kind of amorphous space, that feels like relinquishing control. And so if we have clear policies and we have, clear hierarchies and bureaucracies and things regulating things, that can feel like a safer space. But I think it ends up being kind of self-defeating, because then, like I said, you're not agile enough to respond. You end up in like a surveillance relationship where you're constantly trying to enforce the policy and monitor and things like that, instead of leaning into the positive innovations and transformations that are available with this technology.
I mean, that's kind of like the first principle of student-centered education is you take an assets-based approach, not a deficit-based approach, right? And I think that you have to do that with kind of generative AI too. If you are interested in building literacy in your community, you cannot only live in the land of the don'ts. You have to live in the land of the do's also. And you have to model some of those affirmative actions with students. I mean, that's why I hope that every teacher can really think about one assessment they do over the course of a school year that they can make AI assisted or AI enabled, to use your term, Amanda, because I think we do need to start thinking about how we're going to expose students to this technology in a productive, ethical way, even if a lot of our other assessments are designed to be more AI resistant. But either pathway you take, you're kind of beginning from this place of who are my students? What do they need? And how do I engage them really actively in the process so that it's either really hard or, more importantly, just not appealing to them to delegate this work to a chatbot?
Yeah, and I'll
Absolutely.
build on what you said, Eric, just then about everyone choosing like just one assignment that you can think of how to AI empower, because there is space here, right? You don't have to go whole hog into everything's all AI all the time. Like, you
Totally.
can still keep the assignments that you've always done. You don't have to totally throw out all of your practice, but you can just look for one or two small controlled instances where you can introduce it in a careful and intentional way, and then maybe look at making some of the others less AI vulnerable in a more like traditional sense, that don't incorporate the technology. Like, there's agency here is what I'm trying to say. Like, you have choice. Not everything has to be AI enhanced, but just creating that space on an
Totally.
assignment by assignment basis, I think is a really helpful mindset.
Totally. Totally.
I'm going to like though give a caveat. When we say like one assessment, we're talking about if you're thinking about generative AI in spaces in which students are developmentally at the age to be able to use these tools, and also within the terms of service. So I just want to always make sure that we're not telling you that if you have a 7-year-old, you're going to be like giving them
Right.
ChatGPT. But what we are saying is that when, especially for those students that are like, if you're teaching or working with like high school and or college age, community college, vocational, like that's a space where I think the redesign becomes very important. Whereas the literacy work that you're doing and the modeling work is much more important in the kind of K-6, K-7 realm, where you can do modeling and can do that in, and you can have opportunities for students that need extra support to potentially use the tools with you in an agentic way, Mandy. So like we talk about like the idea, if there's a really difficult thing, have a notebook LM set up that you are guiding students through, or you're creating a podcast or something along those lines. So I do think that we always just need to think about safety here and also find that balance. So the last thing I say, let's come off share so we can see everybody. But the idea of vision, I think, is really important, because one of the things that we always do when we work with district partners or school partners is just be like, what are you already doing that generative AI can help you with? And then what are the things that you've always wanted to do, but haven't had the resources, the time, the support? And I think that that's where I think the idea of vision becomes very, very positive, because I think if you think that generative AI is your end state, again, it's not like the internet was never an end state. The internet was an enabler and sometimes a blocker. It was an empowering tool, and it also was something that was potentially harmful. That's what we want you to think about. So when, Eric pointed out this idea of the idea of that vision, we want that vision to not be like generative AI is going to save or be whatever, but it's like, what are we already doing? Like, okay, we have a big focus on future ready students. Then how are we using generative AI in meaningful ways to get students more ready for the future that is fast coming? And I'm going to tell you right now, even just that slight reframing is going to make this so much easier for people to understand what you're trying to do and not feel like you're just the AI is going to take over. But now, okay, where is that human-centered approach? Where is that approach where the vision itself is the key and the AI is the enabler?
Yeah, and I think we keep coming back in all these comments to this idea of agency and reminding ourselves that we have agency over this technology. And that visioning process you described sort of really tries to get people to remember, like, oh, we have our own goals, we have our own purposes as institutions. It's almost like understanding by design for an institution. Like you start with your goal, you start with a vision, and then you work backwards from there. And generative AI is just one of many different tools that you can leverage to help you work towards that vision. And the other thing I would add in here is when I work with schools on visioning, when I work with teachers on sort of purpose finding as it relates to technology, they are more motivated to learn the tool and experiment with it because they start to see how, oh, this is something I can use for my own purposes. There's not one way to use this. Kind of the thing that is amazing about generative AI is it's accessible, it's powerful, and it's flexible, right? And we don't need to be master coders, or we don't even really need to be prompt engineers anymore to use these tools well. It's more about coming in with clarity about purpose and clarity about what you need and clarity about the questions you want to ask. And then you can really kind of find your own way through it.
Well, and I'll add too, Eric, to that. I think that's really valuable for students to see different
Yes.
approaches and degrees of integration. Like it's not just here's AI, you have to know it so you can have a job. It's like we can make choices about how we're going to use this. We might use it in one area, but not in another. And here's why. I think we owe it to them to model this and have these conversations because this is what we have wrought and the way that we are sending them off into.
Absolutely. I agree, but I'm going to make one point. I think the prompt engineering still does matter, but maybe not in the like the big P, big E prompt engineering, but more in the sense of like, there was just a piece of a paper that came out that was like, even if you use very basic prompting and even the best model, you're going to get very basic answers. It's only when you use better questioning techniques, better prompting techniques that you actually can get the value from every model, but especially the ones that are the best in the market. So I do actually think that that's where kind of teaching kids and teachers that like, and for you all here, that this is a new language. This is a new computer science language. Even though it feels like it's just talking, it actually does make a huge difference to actually have this opportunity to like learn how to reframe, learn how
Yeah.
to ask good questions, know how to take feedback, know how to be patient, because sometimes these tools can be a little bit frustrating. But I do think it gets really interesting when you think about that. That's where the AI literacy component can come in, which I think is
Yeah.
really important.
And I totally agree. And, I think I almost prefer the term sort of question formation over prompt engineering in the sense that like, especially because I work with educators, like that's something that teachers do every day, no matter what. And I think that's what makes teachers a lot of teachers are good prompters because they know how to form questions. They know how to seek information from their students or from a resource or whatever it is. And I think there's kind of real overlap between the work teachers do every day and being good at using
Right.
generative AI, right? I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, we often are like, you use your superpowers. Your superpowers
Yeah.
are patience. It is questioning. It is going to be reframing. It's going to be evaluation and feedback. And we always joke that like I'll go up to like, like use AI in a way that's conversational. So I would never go up to Mandy and be like, here's a question. I don't like your answer. I'm going to leave. Like, I'm not going to stop the conversation. I would definitely never do that with a colleague or a student that like, okay, I don't like it. Let's reframe. And I think that, it's very funny, everybody in the world. I don't know. I've had two debates about AI use in the last 2 weeks on like actual national news in the UK and the US. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is because we're going to shift into durable skills in a moment, but really good prompting or questioning is durable skills. It is critical thinking and evaluation. And I promise you right now, if you teach a 11th grader how to prompt well, they're going to be like, why do I have to do it this way? Why do I have to keep reading and do it like you mean I have to keep asking this like a different question the same way and evaluate? And if you can actually get them into where the value proposition of that is the thing that you come out of is going to be so much better and meaningful and creative for you actually are building parallel skills that can be incredibly durable, even if generative AI wasn't what we were going to be framed in. And I think that that's really the opportunity here is just like, how do we shift those mindsets away from this idea that it's not for everyone or that it's going to take over, but more like the people that get the most out of AI are the people that are the most creative, the most experimental, the most patient. And like, I think that that's where the real power can be.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
So let's like we're gonna shift around. So all of us are big nerds, and so are you all. Okay, can I just say, like our 500 people here, dropping some knowledge in the chat, and we will definitely get to the Q&A. But like I just love how much everyone is sharing and best practices. But one of the things I think is really a fascinating moment about human-centered is that when I taught, it was 21st century skills or the 4 Cs. And now it could be soft skills or durable skills. There's other names for it too, but like all of these like like all of those kind of skills that we've been talking about for at least I would say the last 2 decades. And I think we've been okay at doing, I don't know, Amanda, you're probably the one that's most current in the classroom. Like, I mean, we're like been okay at it.
Mixed results, I would say. I would say the standards movement is kind of in opposition to that a little bit when you have these lists of skills. Even when you try to incorporate durable skills within that, it can't help but pressure you to feel like you have to teach this list of things you have to know, which is no longer the way we engage with knowledge now that we have things like AI that can do a lot of that, right? And so it's about finding the ways to authentically teach durable skills along with your standards, in a way that like kind of brings those forward, which AI can be a wonderful tool for helping you do and redesign assignments and assessments in a way. We have our critical analysis activities for AI outputs that will help you boost your critical thinking skills while you're interacting with AI. It can help you redesign assessments. We have some prompts in our prompt library that will help you convert, essays into discussions, or will help you put in your assessment and ask it to identify ways that you can make it more resistant to AI. So, leverage that tool to augment your capabilities. And I think we'll get to a good place eventually.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go to Eric. So when you think about the durable skills, so like the World Economic Forum's release in January, like, we're going to have massive disruption. I always love this though. It's like by 2030, 170 million new jobs and 92 million lost jobs. And we don't know what those will be, but we're going to say it very loudly in 5 years. But I do think that 5 years is like, we think of like the scale is going to be about 5 years to actual disruption. But like when you think about the opportunity of like what this is going to mean. One of the things that the World Economic Forum has said is that like the analytical and durable skills that are going to be the most important. So when you think about that human-centered approach, let's call it out. What are going to be the skills in the next 5 to 10 years that we're going to value more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I'm like in the middle of a series on my Substack about like, what are the durable transferable skills related to AI? I mean, I do think first and foremost, there is kind of this decision-making skill that really matters because there's decisions to be made about when to use AI and when not to use AI, but also how to use AI. And that's related to literacy, right? Like it's really about sort of, do we know enough to be able to make decisions? My other thing is, there's this wonderful book by Annie Murphy Paul called The Extended Mind. And she looks at a lot of the research about how we leverage our environment, our relationships, and our own bodies to extend our cognitive
Mm.
capabilities. sort of the classic example that we think of as like people who use their fingers to do math, right, or to count. That's an example of sort of leveraging an external tool to help our brain process. And I think there's a real opportunity to think about how we help students understand how generative AI can extend their mind. This is that augmentation piece. What are ways that generative AI can help students see things in new ways, can help them concretize abstract ideas, can help them process large amounts of information? I mean, I think speaking 5, 10 years from now, I think about this idea that we're going to have wearables with AI inside of them, and this AI assistant is going to be able to take in our surroundings in real time in the same way that we are. And suddenly we're going to be able to engage with this other entity about those things. Well, that's kind of extending our minds in certain ways. Like, how do we wrestle with that? What does it mean to work well with that phenomenon? And I think going back to this idea of really teaching students how to keep their own minds at the center and really be self-aware and self-regulated enough to be able to use the tool for certain things and then rely on themselves for other things. That's another one of the skills that I think is really going to matter.
Well, and also to build on that, what do we do with this extra capacity that we've freed up? You know, if
Right.
we've extended our mind in this other way, are we then going to our phone and scrolling through TikTok? Or, you know, how can we meaningfully then engage, you know, in ways that are uniquely human with the knowledge and the environment around us?
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I think so. This is something I've been thinking a lot about because we worked with a set of schools in Atlanta this last week on like, what does assessment become? Because what we were finding is that the structures themselves of school are one of like what Mandy you talked about, like the structure of like standards that has really potentially impacted our ability to teach durable skills in meaningful ways. Is that I do actually think it's really interesting is that when you build, if you think about our definition of AI ready would be an AI literacy plan for everyone within an organization, including parents, students, teachers, and community, and then a set of responsible guidelines. And if you have those two things, and you're doing well. But what happens is when you do that, very quickly you start hitting those structures that it does not allow for because our current assessment structures, our high stakes assessments, or even in college and like graduate school, the idea of a term paper or a research paper are all now, there's an easy button for that. There's an easy button for all of these things, right? I mean, I guess Best Buy was it Best Buy that had the easy button, but or Staples has the easy button. Well, now we have OpenAI's easy button. That what's happening is that it's very clear that there's going to have to be this not just like an augmentation, but actually a redefinition and a restructuring. And so I think that one of the things that we found really powerful about the idea of the skills of the future is I just think about like, what are we going to be doing? And I think I've been using this analogy of like the 10,000 reps that we have. So you think of like Malcolm Gladwell, to be an expert, you do something 10,000 times.
Mhm.
And so it's going to be more important than ever is being able to do the first 500 steps of that, the first 500 reps, which are those foundational skill building. We have to set out and understand and be able to set something on a course, right? And for us, that means that like, if you don't know how to do it on your own, especially a foundational skill, then you should not be using AI as your only output, especially from K to 8. Just shouldn't. And if you want to build true expertise, you're going to have to do that on your own, regardless of your age. That's one. But then it's like the middle 500 steps are going to be so important too, because your ability to redirect, to evaluate, to critically analyze and give feedback on something that you're creating with AI or not is going to be even more important than it is today. And then the last thing is those last 500 steps that are about your ability to critically analyze if the thing you've created is truly fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Is it
Yes.
something that is meaningful, fit for purpose? And I think that that is where I think school has to go, is that we're going to have to teach kids that even though an AI system can do something for you, your only ability to set it on the right path, to evaluate it, and to be able to identify if it's worthy is if you add those skills yourselves.
Yeah.
And I
And
think that that's going to be really important.
I totally, and they have to be, and we have to be explicit with students about those things. And I think this is where a lot of the fundamental things about school that they teach, critical thinking, literacy, and other domains, like reading and writing, those skills still very much matter. We should still absolutely be teaching those things, most often, especially with younger students, without the influence of generative AI. But as students get older, I think I work with teachers of writing a lot. I was an English teacher for 12 years, and so schools often put me in a room with their teachers of writing. And I say, look, writing still matters very much. Human-driven writing still very much matters. But there
Hmm.
is a new category of writing emerging that let's call it hybrid writing, where people are using AI to write. That's the easy button you talked about, but it's also sort of below the easy button, like different and more complex, nuanced collaborations with AI. And I think we do have to introduce older students, high school, higher ed, to this idea that hybrid writing is something you are going to encounter in your life. And certain points you might have to decide whether or not human writing or hybrid writing is for you. And sometimes you might be asked for different reasons to hybrid write. And so, what does it mean to collaborate effectively in that hybrid way, that serves in the context of just knowing what it means to write effectively? I think these are some of the new things that we have to start integrating into those kind of long-standing durable skills that we teach in school.
And Mandy, like, I mean, I think from your perspective, as you were elementary all the way, right? Like, is how important, like, and I know we have people from higher ed here, but I think it's going to be so interesting to see the two, like the areas where higher education, what you're doing to prepare students for a future that is changing so quickly is going to be a huge question. And I think that, as quickly as you can do AI literacy work with your young people and also with your staff is going to be important. But I kind of think when we think about human-centered approaches, K5, man, K6, like the amount of time where we can have kids that are captive audiences, right? That we can limit the amount of technology they have in meaningful ways and or open it. Like I can't get my head, I can't get past the fact of how important I think that time's going to be.
Well, in elementary, kids are just starting to define their identities as learners and how they are going to interact with school and knowledge and these materials. And while we certainly wouldn't want to put a second grader on ChatGPT, like you were saying, we can use that age range to kind of start building this awareness and these attitudes and these mindsets that lay the foundation for more meaningful work later on. I think it's important that we distinguish between the way we as adults who have already been through school
Hmm.
approach using AI
Hmm.
versus how kids who have not yet developed that sensibility and understanding, and they're even just the content abilities. Like if I can't write on my own, how am I going to learn to write hybrid with AI? Which I love that notion of treating hybrid writing as like its own genre that we maybe intentionally address.
Yeah.
But like we can start planting those seeds early, so that kids know that this is a thing. We know you've heard of it. We've had anecdotes from what, third, fourth grade teachers, Amanda, talking about their students' awareness of AI. Didn't one of them call it Al? I think they were like, "Do you know Al?"
Oh yeah, so we do have
Snapchat.
a funny story where like a second grade teacher walked up to me during a session in North Carolina and was like, I have to tell you a story. My second grader is like, I have a new best friend on Snapchat. And she's like, why are you on Snapchat? You're 8. But then she's like, yeah, he's super funny. He tells me jokes. He gives me advice. And she's like, who is Al? What 8-year-old has a best friend named Al? So he opens up Snapchat on his iPad, of course. And what he's done is he's got AI, the Snapchat AI that's been run by ChatGPT for almost 2 years, and was like, this is my best friend. And like, I think that was, and we were sitting there and she's like, she used it as a teachable moment. But we asked people in like, we do our professional development sessions, we asked people who has heard of Snapchat AI as an adult. And people are like, no. And like, this has been the most popular AI tool for young people across the
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
for the last 2 years. Like, and I think that what we don't recognize with that kind of approach sometimes is I think we think we have more time than we do. And I don't want to discourage anybody, but I do think going back to that idea of the internet as more of a correlate here is that we just aren't like, if you are buying your kid or your graduate student a new iPhone, because they're graduate students, they probably need you to buy their iPhone,
Yeah.
going to have Apple Intelligence in it. It's going to have a generative model, right? And I think that that's where it gets really interesting. But I'm going to hold just 1 second. So everyone, we're kind of coming up close to time. Put some questions into the Q&A. Know that the recording we'll share. We'll also make sure you get some of these resources. So don't worry about the chat. We'll make sure you get that. But if you have something specifically for us in the chat, put it in the Q&A. But I think Eric, you had something you wanted to maybe
I
respond
was
to.
going to say super quickly on the idea of younger students. I really agree that we need to focus on core skills. And I think the conversation with them is less like how to use AI and more just that AI is present. I mean, generative AI models are showing up in toys and games and it's in Roblox. And so I think that also is an age group where like parent education feels super important. Just making parents of these young students aware. An elementary school teacher said once when I was doing a training, oh, for this age group, we're talking about like AI readiness as opposed to like AI literacy. And I kind of liked that distinction is what do young students need to be ready for this world that they're going to enter?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, first of all, I just want to say, like, we clearly care, right? Because you all have stayed for like 40 minutes. So, like, clearly there's like a very large amount of people caring. But how are we making, I think one of the biggest things that we're learning is like, how are we actually making this stick? So, before we go to the questions, I think we just go around. I let Mandy be the proxy for AI for education. But like, Eric, like, how, like, what do you do that helps this stick? Like, so what are this, like, kind of things that you've seen be most powerful? And then Mandy could do the same. And then we'll go to Q&A.
I mean, the most powerful stuff I do in my work with teachers is I try not to do one and done stuff, right? Like I'll work with cohorts of educators over a period of time, sort of on, we'll meet in person, then we'll do Zoom a few times, and they're working on projects related to their own workflow, right? And they're thinking about sort of how might AI help me solve this problem or help me do this new thing? How might I model something for my students? And they get support over a period of time to do that. But I think most importantly, the goal of that work with me is ultimately peer-based PD, that they're going to be able to demonstrate to their colleagues what they did, how they did it, what they learned. I mean, I think this kind of like communal professional learning is so critical to build adult capacity and adult literacy. I mean, we know all the research on PD. I know you all know this. The most effective PD is job embedded, peer based, and relevant, right? And so I think if we can empower teachers and support teachers to ultimately teach each other, I mean, I think that's really the stuff that I've seen work the best.
Absolutely. And then Mandy?
Well, I mean, I could say the easy thing, which is giving people hands-on practice with a tool. A lot of
Yeah.
times it's their first time using it, and it's so fun to be there for this kind of awakening moment. But I will, since that's the easy thing, I will go one further and say, we strive really hard to take this approach of like non-prescriptive. We're not here to tell you what you have to do. We're here to show you what you can do and then empower you to apply your own professional judgment to that to decide what that needs to look like best in your context. Because I think that immediately breaks some barriers down if people have already kind of written a script in their mind about how they're going to respond and feel about AI use, to say, no, we're going to honor your opinion. We're just here to build your AI literacy because it is empowering to you as educators. So that's, I mean, unless Amanda, there's anything else you would add for us.
I mean, I think the things that we see that really work are we don't expect anyone has AI literacy and also a common understanding. So our flagship professional development, which we've done a gazillion times, we actually won't work with a partner unless some version of that is part of it. And so, and I think that that's been really powerful. And that's where Mandy's talking about those hands-on opportunities, that level setting. And then I think that like the second thing that we've seen is that our new Train the Trainer that we launched in January is about building internal capacity around generative AI literacy. And I'm pretty sure this is the first time it's ever been done. We have a course that's just about Gen AI literacy training, which we have loved putting together. But what's been really interesting is it's been both individuals and then groups of people from schools, districts, or faculty working together. And the outcome is actually their own contextual PD built on some of our resource and what they've learned. And you could just see the context shifting that's happening, where you can see that people feel more confident, that they feel like they can go back. And actually, a lot of them we still work with, right? We still do PD with those organizations, but that internal capacity, because the thing is, everybody, you might be in here and you were like, faculty or admin said, you're now the AI expert because you're comfortable with learning management systems. And now you have to figure out all the things about generative AI while also doing a learning management system shift. And so what we think is the next stage is really like, how do you prepare and support the people that are in the change management opportunities that are in the embedded nature? Because like Eric and us, like we come in, but we are not able to sustain. And I
Yeah.
think that this has to be sustainable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the most important role that people like us who go to schools, who do direct work with teachers and leaders and parents and communities is empowerment. We have to reframe and set a mindset that puts people in a position to really drive the learning forward. Because you're right, we can't be there all the time. As much as I might want to be in all the schools I work with all the time, it's just the only way this scales out is if we all kind of dive in together.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to shout out some of our Train the Trainer peeps from January are here. So Dale and Wendy and a couple others. We love that you keep hanging out with us. But I do want to say that like this has been, if you have to head out, we'll do the Q&A now, but we have everything that will be recorded. But I just want to say like if you're going to hang out, we appreciate you. But also I know it's like the middle of the night for some of you, so please feel free to go. But what we're going to do is let's actually start to talk a little bit about the Q&A. And so one of the ones that I see that's really come out, first of all, I will tell you right now that we will definitely do an AI and elementary education focused one. So Flora and a couple other people have been asking Macarena. So look out from that. So we'll definitely do that because we do know it's quite different. And actually our AI literacy guide we're working on will have a whole section on that. And then Mandy has in the back burner a set of new K-5 lessons that are similar to our K to 6, similar to our 7 through 12 lessons that Carmen shared in the chat. So know that that's coming for you. So that's an easy one. Well, not easy for Mandy, but it
I'm
definitely is.
trying to make them too perfect. I have to, yeah,
Well,
but
you love it though. I mean, you're
I
an
do love it.
elementary
Yeah.
like you. So I will say everyone, like we're kind of crazy people about content quality, but we're gonna keep pushing. So that's that. But then there's a really interesting one about faculty in colleges. And so I think that we've been doing more work with faculty in colleges, but it does look like there's more pushback, I think, from faculty that like in general than there are from like K-12 teachers. I think K-12 teachers are kind of like, let's figure this out and I'm not going to go fast, but there's actually like I think a lot more resistance and like shutting it down. And so I do think that like Eric, do you have any like thoughts about like how to kind of shift that? I've got a couple, but do you have anything that you'd like to share?
On sort of combating resistance in that
Yes, like
from
it's like
faculty.
very knee jerk. We're not cold dead hands not changing. Kids are
Yeah,
not AI, like yeah.
I mean, it sounds like the way you do your flagship and I do my intro are similar. I do think demystifying the tool is so important, like doing some level setting, getting people in a room, letting them sort of think about their goals and try things with the tool, I think is really important and trying to kind of lower the temperature around the conversation. Like in my experience, walking to a room, there's a lot of emotion associated with this technology, and that's valid. But I think once you kind of lower the stakes, let's be playful, let's try some things, let's kind of think about our own needs rather than these big picture things. People tend to engage a little bit more. They tend to explore it a little bit more because you're giving them the permission to learn through doing as opposed to kind of talking in the abstract. I find it really unhelpful to start an AI conversation with like a debate. Do you know what I mean? It's like, how do we kind of explore and we can debate later so that we're all operating off the same kind of information?
Yeah, I mean, Mandy could talk about it, but the way we frame it is we do like a constructive myths and facts where we hit most of the concerns and don't let anybody out of the room without like anyone out without knowing about AI detection. I mean, I think like, man, do you have anything like that specifically for faculty?
Well, I don't know if there are any Ted Lasso fans in the chat, but I love his saying about don't get mad, get curious.
Yeah.
And I personally have a lot of compassion for higher ed. Like they've spent years developing their expertise. I think they're much more personally invested in their content area than a lot of K-12 teachers are, just because of that time sink. And this definitely feels like the rug has been pulled out from under them and that all of that work has been devalued. So I like to just kind of give people an opportunity to like share a story about why they feel the way they do. And, definitely we, in the context of our myths and facts, we try to kind of proactively head off. Like, we know what you're thinking about. Here's this, and then a lot of times we do get some really rich discussions from the myth and facts section with people talking about their experience and things like that. And so I think just letting people feel heard and letting them have that opportunity that you can walk away. We're just going to play with it today. Eric's Substack is wonderful. He had one on playfulness that most recently came out. I highly recommend to everyone. But we're just going to play today. It's totally low stakes, and then you can walk away and never think about it again, if you really want to. But hopefully that will kind of light a spark that will lead to just the door just has to open a crack, and that's a good place to start with.
Yeah, and I think I think for if you are struggling as like saw like, Kelly doing the hard work as like an academic librarian and others in the Q&A, I think with higher education, one of the things that we found really like beneficial is really establishing what the future is going to mean for your young people. And not the future of 20 years or after I retire, but literally, so there's a Cengage report from last year that says that 62% of hiring managers are already looking for AI skills. 70% of them believe that your institution is training these students in AI literacy skills. And then 55% of the students that were, the recent college graduates that were, surveyed said 55 that they were actively discouraged from using AI in higher education. And so I think that that really helps because it's like we make the joke that everyone, I mean, Eric, you probably remember this, like you started putting like I'm great at Microsoft Office on your resume or like I'm good at Gmail. Like we did not stop kids from learning how to use Excel. And what we need to do in this sense is we have to learn how to use these tools as tools and not replacement. And I think that that inevitability and that importance of this is that if you're in education, then what is the goal of what you're trying to do? And like, if you are teaching young people, it should be to have happy and healthy lives that are fulfilled and lifelong learning as an opportunity. But then I also think by telling people that like the idea that AI detectors are not going to work the same way that plagiarism detectors work. So that idea that we could just do what we did with Wikipedia is no longer possible. And that leads into how the technology works. They kind of establish a base of like, oh, wait, I can't just say no. So I have to
Right.
figure something out. And I will tell you right now, if it's done in the way that Mandy just said and Eric just said, where it's safe, it's experimental, it is not judgy, then what happens is it's a natural shift into like, oh, wait, this could actually be helpful, or I could use this, or man, I've always had this like, term paper that just kids really struggle with, or college freshman up, whatever it is. How am I going to do this differently? And I think that that's where we get so excited about the approach is that if it's set up the right way, it becomes inevitable that we have to do something. But then what we give you is the on-ramp into what that something can become without telling you, without dictating what it looks like. And I think that that is going to be so important. But like if you have a teacher that says or a faculty says you're just going to use Turnitin or GPT-0 and you're going to catch AI cheating, there's a paper that shows that professors were worse, significantly worse at identifying AI written work than AI detectors, and then AI detectors weren't very good either. And the combination of the two were even worse.
But
Like they
that's
actually did worse.
that is where I think it is beneficial to kind of, especially with faculty who've been around for a while, like tenured faculty, like think back on previous examples. Think back to the dawn of the internet, the smartphone, social media, even the calculator, if you want to go back, like all those things met resistance. All those things were deeply disruptive. And rather than debate whether or not they're good or bad, like how did we respond to those disruptions? What did we do well? What did we not do well? And how can we apply those reflections to generative AI? I can guarantee you that our initial response to the internet wouldn't be the same knowing what we know now about it, right? It was it can be a really powerful democratizing space. And I think that sort of this is not kind of coming out of nowhere. We can learn from previous technological disruptions and think about how we want to improve our approach for this
Right.
time go around.
Yeah, and Wendy said that too. I mean, we establish, I mean, pretty much every professor is Generation AI. Like if you're
Right.
born after 1955, you've had, AI has been something in the world. And if you have any device over the last 20 years, you've interacted with artificial intelligence. So I do think it's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's say we have time for, I think, two more questions. I know that Mandy's looking for that Cengage report, but we will also, I think it's called the hireability report, Mandy. Like it was
I
like
think
the
it's
Cengage
the
hireability
graduate
report.
employability report. Let's
Yeah,
see.
that's so let's see, like, what's another good question? Um, okay, so let's talk about writing. So I think that the idea of, there's a couple questions about that easy button, right, for writing. Fascinating, everybody. You know what AI is best at is two things that never get put in the same sentence when it comes to academia: software engineering and writing.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
they're like the weirdest bedfellows, but that is what generative AI is the best for. 40% of all generative AI is used to code, and like another 35% is used for written communication, and then there's like image and vision and things. But like so like what do we have to do to think about like no setting up kids to like learn how to write, but also to assess them, especially at like the higher levels where that AI use is gonna kind of ramp up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm see like the when you look at all the research and what makes writing effective, like why we teach writing in the first place, all the research points to the importance of process over product, right? The process we go through in coming up with an idea, composing idea, curating evidence, organizing that evidence, it's far more important than the artifact we produce at the end. And so something that I'm seeing teachers of writing start to do is think about really helping students make their process visible and therefore accessible through something like a process portfolio where students are doing the process components of writing, maybe in an AI-free way, right? They're doing it in class, or they're doing it by hand, or they're doing it in small groups. And they're composing that portfolio and then bringing that portfolio with them into the summative assessment, because I think when we talk about our worries about the easy button, we have to remember that what is valuable about writing is not what students produce at the end, but the process they go through in getting there. And so if we can intervene at that in that process as educators, everything I've seen and heard from students is that when we invest and assess them in the process, they are less inclined to hit that easy button at the end and just write the essay, because they put energy and time and thought into their work. And I think it's really important to name that for students, when they're invested in and motivated in the task that they've been assigned, they don't want to delegate that work to a bot. They don't want to necessarily hit that easy button. So if we can kind of foreground the process, help students learn how to make the process visible, learn how to assess the process in a student-centered way, I think that's kind of the future of, writing, the teaching of writing right now.
Man, did you have anything additional?
Well, I love Joseph Moxley's Writing with AI course that he
Hmm.
has shared the syllabus for online. You know it, Eric? Yeah, I'll link it in the chat. But it's really forward thinking and it's balanced, but he also spends a lot of time building context for students on why you might not want to write with AI. And then he
Mm.
moves into some assignments where you're doing a little bit of both. He looks at plagiarism and things like that in a really integrated way. So I'll drop the link in for all of the writing folks to check.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll just do an extra plug for that, just because the course, it's open source, the whole thing's available. He breaks this course down into kind of 8 creative challenges for
Hmm.
students, some of which involve AI, some of which very explicitly do not. And the core question is, what does human agency matter when it comes to writing in the age of AI? And that's a debate that teachers of writing are having right now. And I love the idea of engaging students in that debate,
Oh my
like
gosh,
having
yes.
them engage with teachers and kind of co-construct some ideas and guidelines based on that, because it is very disempowering for students to walk into a writing classroom and be told what is good for them and what is not good for them. So that writing course is really about, I want to hear from students, and I want you to be rigorous in investigating, like, what are the implications of this
Right.
technology. I think it's a great model.
Absolutely. And we love student voice. We love student agency. I just want to say thank you. We're coming up on time. First of all, I can't believe that half of like 300 people hang out with us the whole time. We
For an
appreciate all of
hour,
you.
you know.
Eric, thank you so much. We love your work. Mandy is definitely a stan, and I am as well. But please check out Eric's work as well. We'll make sure that your way to get in touch with you and your LinkedIn are available in the what becomes our email that we send out tomorrow. I want to say thank you to Mandy, who is always happy to be tapped to do this work. And I just want to appreciate everybody in the audience. Like, can't do this without you. And I cannot tell you how amazing it is to have 500 people that genuinely want to help each other and to listen and to engage. We feel very lucky that that's the case and just wish you all the best luck in what you're doing. And we just really appreciate you all. And I hope you have, wherever you are, either go to bed, eat some lunch, or have a good morning. We appreciate you all, and we'll see you next time.